movement will decide who wins this argument?
No, not in the end, because, look, as far as I'm concerned, the economic argument for remaining in the EU is extremely strong, not least because those workers that you're referring to make a net contribution to the British economy. They pay more tax than they take out. They help to pay for the NHS, care for the elderly and other things like that. And secondly, because if we wish to retain access to the biggest single market in the world, 500 million people, then it's quite clear that we would have to continue to accept free movement, because that's what Norway and Switzerland have to do. And I think in the end, people will decide the economic argument and the economic risks. And we've seen the IMF's report that came out yesterday talking about the risk if we were to leave will weigh very heavily with people when they make their decision.
We'll come to the IMF and other institutions in just a moment. But Owen Paterson, on this issue of freedom of movement and whether in the end it will be what persuades people one way or t'other, you've got conflicting information. The think tank Open Europe says immigration is unlikely to fall in the event of Brexit because of examples of other large developed countries with low unemployment outside the EU still have high levels of migration. Do you accept that? And what level of net migration would you like to see?
Well, people accept immigration because we have an expanding economy and we need to bring in skilled people, but we need to have control, and we don't have control. So when I was at DEFRA, we had a SAWS scheme which brought in skilled people to pick fruit of one sort of skill. I saw an eye surgeon 2 weeks ago, absolutely furious that she can't source more experienced, better qualified, more skilled eye surgeons from California, southern India or Hong Kong. And that's the problem. We need to have control of our own immigration policy so we can bring in targeted, skilled people in a whole range of sectors.
But the numbers may not change. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the numbers depend on what our economy requires. But let's get the power to decide this in our own parliament by people who we kick out if they make the wrong decisions.
Right, so that's the difference. If we accept Owen Paterson's argument that actually the numbers may not change that much, or they may vary, but it will be us who decides what sort of people come in and who stays with the right skills.
Well, if Owen is accepting that the numbers may not change, then what's the point of leaving the European Union? And secondly, this point about the single market, because the two are intimately connected, I think it's very clear that if we were to vote to leave, the EU would say, well, if you wish to continue to have full access to the single market with all of the benefits it brings for jobs and investment and economic growth that we have seen, you will have to do what Norway does, which is to pay in to the European budget. They pay in almost the same head of population. Of course, you have to accept all of the rules. You do. You have to accept free movement. Norway has to accept it. The only difference, as you know, Owen, is we will have removed ourselves from the room when it comes to making decisions about how the single market works. Now, how does that make us better off?
Right, I mean, Owen Paterson, isn't that the case that it could be a trade-off? In those negotiations, that's what the other EU states could say. The trade-off, the quid pro quo, will be that you do still have to have some sort of freedom of movement. Otherwise, we won't give you full access. They'll give you access, but we won't give you full access.
We're not Norway. We are the fifth largest economy in the world.
So we'll get a better deal.
We're the only G7 country that got the fastest growth. We will be able to get control of our own policy in our own parliament, and people are very angry about this because they've had no say on this issue because we don't control this policy, and they know perfectly well people can bowl up at Victoria Station this afternoon, drawn in by our growing economy, and there's no decision on our part who comes and goes. And that will change if we get control of our own policy. Now, the numbers depend on how fast our economy is growing and which sectors want which skilled people. And that's what you want. We want a targeted policy bringing the right people for the right jobs at the right time.
And the thing is, Hilary Benn, at the moment, there's no stopping people coming from the EU in large numbers, not just from Eastern Europe, but from Southern Europe, where the economies are still floundering, from Spain, from Italy, from Portugal. Interviews all morning about the fact that in Spain, young Spanish people cannot get jobs that pay anything like the rate that they are going to be paid here. And again, we wouldn't be able to do anything about that.
No, that is true. And I mean, the prospects for young people in Spain are pretty grim. I mean, it's one of the reasons why our decision, the last Labour government's decision not to join the euro, was very wise at the time and even more wise in hindsight. But they are coming, Joe, and they are contributing to the economy. I think the problem with...
But they are often low-skilled workers.
...is to constantly assert that we will be able to continue to get access to the single market on current terms and not have to accept free movement. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. And the problem with your argument, Owen, is that you won't control that, and I wouldn't control it in the event of us voting to leave. It would be the other member states. And the choice that people have to face is, do we stick with what we know and what we've got, which is access to the largest single market in the world with all of the benefits, or do we take a risk on not getting as good a deal. And you can't promise the deal would be as good, can you?
Well, first of all, it's looking like we're going to win because ICM gave us a 3-point lead last night. We will have a massive mandate from the British people. This is a key issue in the campaign. And we will be negotiating from a position of enormous strength. That changes the whole debate. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. What we're saying is we want to control our own borders and decide who comes in and when. We don't have that control now, and there are people watching this programme who are completely infuriated by that because they know we're powerless.
How infuriated were you, or how damaging do you think it is that institutions like the IMF put out statements saying and highlighting the risks, the uncertainty? Do they have as much sway as the government will have us believe?
Well, the good news is the IMF has got a track record of getting forecasts heroically wrong. They completely missed the 2008 recession.
They weren't alone, of course.
They then told us that George Osborne's sensible measures to get public spending back under control would lead to a terrible shock in 2013. Christine Lagarde actually said, do I have to go on my knees to George Osborne to apologise? So I think we can all relax about this. This report is doom and gloom. You put your head in the oven if you read the whole thing. Everywhere's going to go down. China, America, South America. And what it's actually showing is that the UK will continue to have the fastest growth in Europe. And we come down 0.3 points from 2.2 to 1.9.
And does anybody care? I mean, the IMF is an institution, I mean, certainly, yes, within these sort of hallowed walls, if you like, in Westminster, people do care about what institutions think. But out on the streets, people are thinking this is the time to be anti-establishment. We don't want to be told what's better for us by these lofty organisations like the IMF. Will it actually sway any votes?
Well, in the end, people have got to make a choice. Now, I'm convinced there will be an adverse economic impact if we leave. It's why every single survey of business opinion has showed that a majority of those polled in those organisations have said that we should remain in the European Union. And look, if we don't get the deal, you confidently predict that we will, but I don't think it's so sure at all. They might say free trade in industrial goods. Of course they might. When it comes to services, which is really important to the British economy, they might say, well, we're not quite so sure about that. And the Leave campaigners say, oh, well, let's be like Canada. Now, it's taken them 7 years. It isn't quite yet a done deal. That doesn't give them full access to the single market. So the rooms out there are not terribly encouraging for the Leave argument. And the fact is, in the end, people have to decide, do they feel that we have benefited economically and will continue to benefit and be better off because we're in the European Union, precisely because we have access to that single market. But that sounds like you don't think the IMF will actually have that much sway in itself. I mean, it may feed into, as you say, arguments about uncertainty generally. What about the press? We haven't had that many official declarations in terms of in or out, but there are stories on a daily basis from The Telegraph, The Daily Mail, The Sun, The Times, running pro-Brexit stories. How worried are you about that? Well, look, in the end, the press will do what the press...
Yeah, but what about the influence?
No, sure. Look, I think what will happen in the end is people will have to decide. People may feel, they may say, look, I don't love everything about the European Union. This is not a referendum on whether you love the European Union. It's about what is the wise thing to do. And I think people will go into that polling booth and decide, I may not like this and I may not like that, but do I really want to take a risk on us damaging our future economic prospects by leaving? And that's where the IMF's warning yesterday will have an impact.
I'll just let you have a final word here.
Very brief. They are leaving us. They are going to form a new coherent state around the Eurozone from which we will be excluded. And there's dirty work at the crossroads. Yesterday, a debate in the European Parliament that the IMF should take our seat on the IMF. So that is what is happening, and we will be excluded from major decisions. We need to get back control. We need to get back our full seat on the WTO, all the world bodies that increasingly decide regulation, and we will completely re-galvanise world free trade, which is stalled at the moment. It's the great tragedy in the world, and we are the great free trading nation, and we want to go completely international, working with all our historical links. And that would be a massive benefit, not just to hard-working people here, but some of the poorest people across the world.
That is so wrong, because being in the EU, the truth, Owen, is it strengthens our voice internationally in a whole range of fields.
And I am going to stop this discussion at this note. But only very temporarily, yeah.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.